Welcome, everybody, to the April 27th meeting of the Moscow Administrative Committee. To my right's John Weber, to my left is Jim Boland, and to his left is Gary Riedner, and I'm Dan Carscallon. First item on the agenda is the approval of the April 13th, 2015 minutes. All three of us were here.
I move approval.
Second.
All right, we'll consider them approved. Next up is an amendment of Title IV, Chapter 3, Chapter 11, and Chapter 12 of Moscow City Code regarding temporary uses. Mike Ray will present.
Gentlemen.
Mike, good afternoon.
Afternoon. So what we'll be discussing today is an upcoming amendment to the zoning code to allow temporary uses, and that'll be coming to council next Monday for a public hearing. So just wanted to brief the council on background with temporary uses. Typically they're referred to as temporary sales display stands, but most municipalities refer to them as temporary uses. You typically see them every year during December, Christmas tree stands, got fireworks stands around the 4th of July, sunglass stands that pop up, usually in vacant properties, produce stands, art stands are just some examples. The issue we have is that temporary uses are currently not defined within our zoning code, which means that with an exclusionary nature, if a use isn't defined or listed within a zoning district, it's generally not allowed. And so that's really our first issue with temporary uses. Usually what we had determined is that if temporary use is allowed, whatever they're selling is allowed in the underlying zoning district, then it's just a permitted use within a commercial zone. We did have two issues over the last year. We had a fireworks stand that was in close proximity to an intersection. It was on residential property on an undeveloped lot. And so residential zones don't allow retail sales within them. It was close proximity to that busy intersection, and we had parking access on site, which was problematic, and there wasn't a small sidewalk that was accessing the site from a larger parking lot, which provided a safety hazard. We also had a produce stand that was located near the south couplet on an undeveloped property. That was also in close proximity to a busy state highway intersection. The access points were really undefined. There's two highway approaches, and a lot of people were using the northerly approach, which required them to access the whole property and go across the whole property in order to get to the produce stand. And there was a lot of dust or mud generated from that activity on the site. It also had poor circulation, lack of parking identified on the site. So we had taken this to administrative committee before, and the committee had directed us to take a look at it, how other municipalities regulate temporary uses, and to work with Planning and Zoning Commission on the issue. And we had taken a look at Boise, Post Falls, Spokane Valley, Eugene, Oregon, LeGrand, Oregon, on how they regulate temporary uses. And most require temporary use permits, and that's in order to review vision triangles, setback requirements of the underlying property, circulation on site, cars coming in and parking, also access points to the adjacent street or highway system, as well as duration of the use on the property. And then just to make sure it was temporary use was in the appropriate zoning district. And so after looking at those jurisdictions and looking at their ordinances, Planning and Zoning Commission and staff had crafted the proposed ordinance that will be before you. And what we'll be doing is going into Chapter 3 within the commercial zoning districts and within central business, general business, motor business, industrial, and urban mixed commercial. We'd be adding temporary uses subject to the specific use standards of Chapter 12 of this zoning code as a listed permitted principal use. Also within Chapter 3, motor business, we would be amending one of the principal permitted uses. Planning and Zoning Commission didn't want to, or wanted to draw a distinction between those temporary landscape yards that are usually associated with maybe Walmart, comes into the parking lot, Moscow Building Supply, same thing. They wanted to draw a distinction on that and have those not be temporary uses because they're really associated with building material supply yards.
Is it, though, would it be just those that are associated with that business? I mean, Moscow Building Supply has their stuff out in their lot, or Walmart has their stuff out in their lot, or would it be like having another yard and garden place come and set up shop in their lot.
It would be
kind
all.
of complementary.
Yeah, it would be all. Yeah, it would allow, it wouldn't have to be incidental to a store.
It doesn't have to be tied to it.
Doesn't have to be tied to it, yeah. So we'd just be specifying, it already says building and materials, stores and yards, so we'd just be adding landscape in there just for clarity in the code. And then also within limitations on uses, within motor business, we have this requirement that all uses have to be conducted wholly and entirely within enclosed buildings. And we draw a distinction here, add landscape supply yards so there's no confusion, and we'd also add temporary uses because obviously these are not temporary structures that are usually located outside, and so we would be adding those to the limitations on uses so there's no confusion. And then just for consistency, this is the same. When we looked at industrial zoning district under the permitted uses, it just says building, material, yards. And so just to make sure our uses are consistent across zones and we're using the same terminology, just be clarifying this would be building and landscape, materials, stores, and yards. Then we've been going into Chapter 4, the definition section. We have to add a definition of temporary use, which would be a land use established for a limited duration, which does not require permanent site improvements. Temporary uses include, but are not limited to, the erection of temporary structures for activities such as fruit, vegetable sales, Christmas tree sales, fireworks sales, art sales, and other retail sales, which are permitted in the zoning district which the proposed use is to be located. And that brings us to the temporary use section, and within Chapter 12, this is the specific use standards chapter. We'd have a statement of applicability and purpose, which states that it's the intent of this section to allow temporary uses upon developed or undeveloped commercial property within the city, but they have to be subject to the following standards, which are intended to reduce potential traffic, parking, safety, and nuisance issues associated with the short-term nature of the uses. And then we get into the specific standards, and these are similar to the standards that we've seen in those other jurisdictions. We've got site access, making sure that ingress, egress to the property has to be from an established vehicular approach, or if there's no curbing around the outside, it's just a dirt, vacant lot, that the temporary approach be approved by the city engineer in these circumstances. And they also have to be clearly identified and delineated and shall not present a traffic hazard to the adjacent roadway, and that would be determined by the city engineer as well. We want to make sure site circulation is delineated and maintained on the property, and that's in order to reduce the risk of conflicts within parking. Make sure setbacks are all accounted for the setbacks of the underlying zone. We want to make sure the vision triangle, as we do in other developments. ITD has a different standard that they apply depending upon the level of the street that it's on, but usually within our code, we go 40 feet back in either direction of the street intersection, draw a triangle, and that's your site triangle, and everything within that area has to be of a certain height, and so it doesn't prohibit the sight distance of oncoming traffic. So just have a statement about that. Duration. Each temporary use may not exceed 45 days per calendar year, and that's total. Have a statement about nuisances where they not result in dust, noise, tracking of dirt in the public right-of-way, or other nuisances generated on the property. And then that'd bring us to the last section where a permit would be required, but it'd only be required for those uses that are conducted on undeveloped property or property which does not have an existing developed parking area. And so all the ones that you see, Howard Hughes parking lot, the fireworks stand at Rosars, wouldn't need to come talk to us, no permit required. It'd just be the ones like the produce stand that we'd want to come in and get a permit just to make sure we can address, mark the locations where they're entering, make them delineate the parking area, and those would really be the only ones that would have to come talk to us and get a permit. So,
because obviously they've got permission from
the
business owner. So.
Yep. They have permission from the underlying property owner, and so Planning and Zoning did conduct a public hearing, and that was on April 8th, and they recommended approval to City Council, and like I mentioned before, we have an upcoming public hearing before Council at our May 4th, 2015 meeting. I'd certainly be able to answer any questions that you have.
Guys got any questions?
No, I've heard Mike go over this a number of times at Planning and Zoning. He answered all of their questions, and he crossed the T's and dotted the I's, cleared up the situation, and I think we ought to just move this ahead to the public hearing.
The only question I have for Mike is, if you're going to set up, for instance, a stand in an existing lot, let's say Howard Hughes, where there's egress and ingress, and onto the property, what the site triangle thing, how does that enter in? They still have to talk to the city engineer about, they can't put it right on the corner so you can't see around it.
Yeah.
So,
well, all these standards would still apply, and so if they set up shop and the city engineer drives by and sees that they're maybe in the site triangle, well, we'll just go out there and work with them to move the stand back a little bit in order to meet the requirements. Yeah, they're still subject to these regulations. They're just not required to get a permit if they're on those developed properties. And in my estimation, they don't appear to have a conflict with any of these requirements. Usually they're set back quite a ways off of the street, and so I don't think we'll have any issue at all with that.
is there any mechanism where somebody wants to set one of those up where they get a list of things they should be aware of like that? In other words, if
Yeah, I think that as part of the temporary use permit, we'll probably have a checklist of everything that we have on here that may be included within the ordinance, and we could give that to people no matter if they're required to get a permit or not, just as a handout so people can have. So,
I think that'd be a good idea.
Okay. All right, we'll go ahead and move this forward to full council for a public hearing next week. Thanks, Mike. Next up is the 2015 Farmers Market Promotion Program grant program. It's a grant program. We're going to have Elisa and Kathleen tell us about it.
There'll be a test on the acronyms in here when we're done.
Oh, goody.
The United States Department of Agriculture, which is our USDA, has a program that's called the Farmers Market Promotion Program, and it's a grant program that has, I think, been around for about 8 years now. And we applied back in 2007 and were awarded about $35,000, and we did things like we bought tables, chairs,
Banners.
Wagons, hand washing stations, promotional materials, and I think that was the first year that we had done the cooking classes.
Yep.
We partnered with U of I and Helen Brown on that project, so it worked out very well for us. And then since then, the farmers market has went through the strategic planning process with a consultant, and so we felt it was time that we come forward and look at the same program again. This time we're looking at a business plan to go along with the strategic plan, so we can actually take a look at the things that were in there, ask the additional questions we need to know, and move forward on how the market should grow. And should it or shouldn't it, and also the economic impacts of the market to the city, and taking a look at both of those aspects in those reports and deciding how we move forward with it. And so we would apply for funding for those two projects or those two documents. We would contract those out to consultants.
Mm-hmm.
And also we're looking at, we do not own any photos, the city itself. Most of the photos that we have of the market are taken by other people, and so we don't always have permission to use those unless we request it. And they're requested quite often in different marketing materials that we do and different things. So we need to hire a professional photographer to take some photos off the top of the buildings and different...
That we own.
That the city owns, yes. Yes, and along with that, we'd like to cut some video that would also be available. That's requested quite often. Just some short videos that we can use for marketing of it throughout the region, different things.
So you're talking about three parts, and they would all be folded into the same grant
Yes.
application?
Yes. Mm-hmm. And the overall focus of the grant is to promote the farmer to the open market and get their products sold. And so with growing the market, we would be able to have more farmers at the market. And it's more focused not so much on the craft or the food vendors, but more on the farmers, and being able to have, different types of market items available that are fresh fruit and vegetables and
Raw materials.
yeah. And also, I think with that, the EBT program would expand. There would be, more access to it. So we're looking at, these tools to be able to move forward and see which direction we should go, because we do know it's one of the main things that's driving the city in the summer, and the focus is half of the year. So.
And there's no match on the grant?
No, there is not.
And how much are we applying for? Just
We're requesting, we're not exactly sure the number just yet. We've got to do a little more work on that, but not to exceed $85,000.
Okay. Gary?
Yeah, one of the things is we've moved this ahead, of course, with Farmers Market moving to Main Street. Kathleen in her strategic plan talks about the right sizing of the market. It's really impossible to gauge the impacts of the market without doing these sorts of studies. We've contacted some economists who have an interest in doing that. Once I think the council, the vendors, the public has an idea of what that market means to Moscow, then we can more accurately determine the direction we need to go with it. So look at the impacts, then look at what kind of a business plan do you want? Is expansion just till people keep coming in, we're going to keep accommodating them? Is there a point of diminishing returns where we want to say, okay, we're going to limit it to this footprint or these parameters or whatever? So we aren't just taking all comers. We're not looking for a place to keep expanding it if it's actually getting larger than it needs to be. As we've talked about in the past, a 26-week festival, if you will, that draws the kind of people into downtown Moscow every weekend is a gem that a lot of communities would like to have. I think as staff, Kathleen and the rest of us recognize that we need to nurture it. We need to move it ahead in a way that is systematic. So although it started organically, it's getting to the point where it needs to be managed. We're closing public rights of way to do it. Public has a right to have some input into how it's run. So this is a way for us to do that.
Go ahead.
If we do get a grant, which I don't see any reason we won't, the grant goes to the city?
Yes.
Correct.
Okay.
So just a little background, John. We did receive this grant before, and it was $35,000, and we did do a lot of, I call it infrastructure and equipment. Some of the tents, tables, chairs, wagons, we're still using that. Some of the music, sound equipment, we're still using it in the market. So it was a really good grant for resources. We get a lot of requests for whether it's Department of Commerce in Boise, Idaho Association of Cities. People request footage and film all the time, and we don't own any content. So it's been recommended that we do that. And the other thing is, as Gary references, when I did my report and I mentioned the metrics, the USDA is looking at metrics in markets and measuring markets. So this kind of falls in line with some of the data we've been collecting, and I think it'll be a good grant. So we did receive the Farmers Market Promotion Program grant through the USDA. Then we got a call with an RBOG grant through the USDA that paid for the strategic plan. So now we're going back to the USDA for another FMPP.
I think it's a good idea.
I can see no downside in this.
Okay.
Yeah, like Kathleen said, we have numbers.
Yep.
They look good. What do we do with them? And hopefully this will help us figure out what those numbers mean and what we can make out of it. All right, we'll forward this for
Consent
approval.
agenda?
We can go ahead and put it on consent, Gary.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Next up is request for beer, wine garden, and public right-of-way from Bucers, and Gary's going to present it.
Okay. Sure, I've got it in
Now
front
that
of me
we've
here.
approved doing this, somebody wants to try it.
Yes. Okay, what you have in your packets, we've received a request from Bootsers to have a beer garden as part of a street closure permit on May 15th. The request is contained within your packet. It requests closure from 6 p.m. until 11 p.m. coincidental with the street closure for an outdoor concert, which there were a few of those, I believe 3 of them last year, including the Bandletown Festival, which worked out fairly well. Alcohol was not allowed to be in the public rights-of-way because the council did not allow it at that time. So there were some concerns voiced by the police, and Chief Duke, I believe, is here to address those, but the sound and the noise ordinance, he would like the restriction to be from 6 to 10 p.m. rather than 6 to 11. And the council, as you know, a couple of weeks ago, amended the ordinance to allow for alcohol, beer, and wine within the public right-of-way pursuant to resolution, as we've allowed it to be in public parks pursuant to resolution as well. We have a draft resolution. It needs some more work. Rod, unfortunately, was on his way out, so he started drafting it. I lent it some of my poor attorney skills to try and get it somewhat for you.
Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you very much. At any rate, it is set up for 10 o'clock. It has the same things that the resolutions in the public parks are there. The perimeter has to be secured. That security has to be approved by the police. That it's recommended no less than 2 police officers allow for security. Council can waive that or moderate that upon the request of the requester if the council feels that is in the public's best interest, and that's what we're looking for here. A good, I guess, comparison is Rendezvous in the Park, which for the first year it was 2 officers, then I believe it was 1 officer, and now Rendezvous is allowed. Yeah, they hire their own security, and there have been no incidents in the time that Rendezvous has been doing that. So a pretty good track record. I think 6 years now.
10
years
since 2005.
Man, time flies.
I just happen to know that at the top of my head.
Okay, so this is the first time we've done this sort of thing. There are some considerations the council needs to make, and that is, if the applicant's here, I'd certainly invite the applicant up. You have an email in the packet regarding Pat Greenfield talks about security and requesting waiver of the requirement of police officers. I think the chief would like to address security to the council. Of course, the beer and wine regulations remain in full force, and that is that it has to be a contained area, that there has to be a designated boundary, and that there has to be regulation of the alcohol that goes on, alcohol use that goes on within there. One of the things I think the council needs to consider in this and in the resolution is that this isn't authority to operate, to close a street in order to have a beer garden. Council's discussion at the time the ordinance was passed was that if there is a festival or an event in the public's interest and the street is closed, that a beer garden may be an ancillary use to complement that public festival or event. So I want to be very careful about that it is not a private business use of the public right-of-way, at any rate on a regular basis.
So, were there not a festival, we wouldn't see any application for a beer garden. That's something that wouldn't happen, or concert, whatever were there not another event using the right-of-way, there would be no allowance for a beer garden at all whatsoever.
That is not, I believe that is correct. I'd have to consult with the
That's
city
kind of
attorney on that, but that was the discussion the council had at the time.
Something
it was
else has
passed.
to be happening for that to happen.
Exactly.
Yeah, we're not approving drinking as the central activity.
Right.
Exactly. And I want to make sure, because I think even the applicant in this case at the beginning was, had misperceived that the council, by allowing this by resolution, does not mean that people will be able to wander the public right-of-way with open containers. Right. It has to be a confined area that's regulated according to code. So with that, I turn it over to the chief.
Chief, what would you like to?
Just to clarify, on resolutions in city parks are now Main Street, we do not support or recommend self-policing. Even Rendezvous has to hire security guards if they don't want to do police officers. So just to waive that is out of the exception. But some of the issues we had, like I said, last year there was 3 events down on Main Street that they closed the street for. 2 of them were by boosters themselves. The first one occurred on June 27th, where they had a band and a street party, and they were able to serve on their sidewalk cafe ordinance or area. And out of that, we have received noise complaints. So I assigned an officer on their second block party on August 15th to monitor the music and the noise, and we mediated that by moving the bands and all that. But the officer did make note that there was a person outside the sidewalk cafe area and did approach the management on it. The Vandaltown block party that occurred on the 26th was assigned 2 officers to work based on, since it was a chamber and city function, the city paid for the officers to work that. Of the 5 that applied for catering permits outside the resolution that allowed the sidewalk area to expand, the only issue we had was with boosters, and there was 5 complaints by my officer that approached management to address those. Every time they walked up, there were people outside the area. So based on the history that we have, that they were trying to control the best they can, but people had it in their mind they wanted to take the alcohol to the band site and just sit and monitor around that. They were very respectful as far as the management addressing that, but it seemed like it was out of their control, and maybe there was an issue about they could tell the people, but that's all they felt they could do. They could not enforce people moving back into their sidewalk cafe area, and that's why I recommend 2 officers for this party, especially since it will be in the right-of-way.
Okay. John?
I agree with the chief. This is going to be the first time that this particular change in policy has been in effect, and until we know more about it, I would feel more comfortable with one, or as the chief says, 2 uniformed officers, and people are going to want to go to where the band is with their beer, and if they can't,
They need to know.
they need to know, and if you've got an officer in a uniform saying, no, it goes back there, I think we can stop some of these problems before they start.
Is there anybody from Boosters that wants to come on up, Matt?
Oh, I'm sorry, I think you were just.
Oh, well, I know you're there, but do you want to speak towards does anybody want to speak towards it, or?
Sir, I'm here as a proxy for Ms. Pat if you guys have any questions, but otherwise.
You guys will just go with what we get. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Jim?
And just as far as the confinement, at the Rendezvous in the Park, it started out as a small beer garden in the middle, and it expanded because the entire area of the function is fenced. It's easier to police. So is it possible to not require where the street is closed, that the area where the entertainment is and the alcohol is allowed in the right-of-way, if that's fenced, it's much easier to police and it's easier to control than trying to keep everybody in a little confined area. Is it not possible we could fence that?
I think the city clerk may have a comment about that, since she's the one who issues those temporary alcohol licenses.
Talk about emergency vehicles getting through the public right of way, because that's been our
Go ahead, Chief.
concern.
One comment on that is they have to respect the age of the beer garden itself. And when we did have Rendezvous that first time, a lot of people, when it was confined, decided to bring their own liquor in off the residentials, and that was the first year we had, so there was a lot of education going on at that point. Maybe in a year or two, as this gets more educated, there might be more ability to use someone else, but I don't think you want to just restrict the whole beer garden itself to someone 21, because you're not going to allow family members and children to come into this event.
Right.
City clerk makes a good point, too, that if you fence off the entire public right-of-way, then emergency vehicles can't get down Main Street either.
It is still public right-of-way. It's
Exactly.
not
Yeah, that's
really a park.
That's a different thing from a park where you have to have access.
Right.
You bet.
I'm agreeing with John that, Rendezvous, when it started, we made them hire Moscow PD to do it, and that started getting lax as the event grew up, I guess, matured, I guess is a good term for it.
I would say it got lax, but it,
No,
you needed less.
Relax.
Yeah.
this is Booster's first time, so we need to, for the time being, I guess, have the on-site education until we know that it's going to work out. I mean, like you said, Chief, you've had experience with them not being having the able to enforce it in the past, so we want to be able to help it and help this along and help it succeed.
Yeah, that information was also passed on. Councilman Steed had firsthand knowledge, and Rod Hall also had firsthand knowledge of the issues that went on during the Vandal Town Block Party.
Okay. John, something else?
Well, my only other comment or question more is the 11 o'clock. Butchers wanted to go from 6 to 11, and it was changed to 10. Is that because we've already got an ordinance
That's the noise ordinance.
that shuts it down at 10 o'clock? Is that correct?
That's what it is in the parks. It's 10.
That's in town in general.
The noise ordinance gives me authority to waive some of the times and decimal readings, but based on city code, anything after 10 o'clock is a public nuisance. I've been mostly a hearing, so I have never approved anything after 10 o'clock, especially in that area where you do have some residents living.
Okay.
I can understand the closure till 11 because it may take that long to pack everything up, but actually having the actual
Music.
event time stop at 10. I don't have a problem with that either. Gary, you don't really have the resolution finalized, like you said.
No, we're looking for direction. We'll get it finalized and bring it to council in your regular session on Monday with your direction if you'd want it approved with those, or recommending approval with those changes.
Yeah, I think we can approve it we're in agreement with the two officers. You guys, the event stops at 10, the actual noisy part of it anyway, and then I guess you can still, I don't know how you want to say it, but keep the closure till 11 to give them time to get their cleanup done.
Yeah, the street closure has been authorized till 11 o'clock. The noise is something different, and that's the chief's bailiwick.
Right.
The alcohol would also cease at 10 o'clock based
fine.
upon this resolution and your direction.
Okay, was there anything else that we missed in there?
I don't think so.
Okay, well, can we get that done? When they were wanting to do this on the 15th? We can probably
15th.
get it done, though.
Well, it'll come
Next
at
week?
your next council meeting.
Okay.
Does the applicant have any other comments so we can make sure we got
You guys
that?
have anything you want to bring forward? Okay.
Thank you.
But we'll hear it next Monday and go from there. All right. So that's, of course, regular agenda.
Yes, sir.
Next up is Palouse Knowledge Corridor Boot Camp sponsorship request, and Gary Riedner is going to present that.
Okay. Received a request. Councilmember Mr. Kraus is a board member, council-appointed board member of Palouse Knowledge Corridor. Wayne can talk about the Palouse Knowledge Corridor Entrepreneurial Bootcamp. He's requested, as has been done in the past by some of our sister governments, funding multiple scholarships to Be the Entrepreneur Bootcamp. It's $2,500 per scholarship. The request is for 2 scholarships at $2,500 apiece for a total of $5,000. He's proposing that this funding be made from non-prioritized projects, legislative reserve, out of the $25,000 that the council budgeted last year. There's remaining $7,156, so there's capacity under there. I'll leave it to Wayne to talk about the benefits of the Be the Entrepreneurial Bootcamp. Council.
Okay, thank you. It's a little strange being over on this side of the table, being the presentor instead of the presentee.
Be ready for some questions.
Ask Dan if when it's your permission to talk, though, if you would. You know, you guys, I know you're familiar with the Palouse Knowledge Corridor. Palouse Knowledge Corridor came into existence a number of years ago, 8 or 9 years ago, I think it actually started out more as another one of the economic development agencies in the area, but it's really identified, come into its own identification, its own identity, and that is more of an educational venue for small startup businesses. One of the issues that you have with startup businesses, small entrepreneurs, and I think, Jim, you can probably attest to this, and John also to an extent, is that you can go to university and you can get a degree in a variety of different types of management venues, but you cannot get one that actually teaches you how to manage a small business, because as a small business owner, you're everything. You're the HR director, your payroll, your advertising, you're the budget manager, and that's where the difficulty becomes. And folks that go to start a new business struggle, and they don't know what they don't know. And that's an issue. So PKC started, Palouse Knowledge Corridor started a new venue last year, and that was Be the Entrepreneur Bootcamp. And the whole idea was to identify small startup businesses that needed knowledge. They needed to know, how do you go about doing this? And they were very successful last year with 14 to 15, what they call campers, folks that came in. One of the issues that you also have with these folks is that, of course, they're on a shoestring budget. And if it's $2,500 for them to be able to come to this for 5 days, they struggle just to find the money. That's why we're looking at trying to fund these with some scholarships. The boot camp overview, the Entrepreneur Bootcamp, it's an intense 5-day hands-on training program designed to accelerate the development of business models, to test the viability of products and ideas, identify funding options, prepare entrepreneurs for business plans and investor pitches. Some of the goals are it empowers entrepreneurs with a toolbox full of new business skills and analytical abilities, advance new ventures prospects with a solid business model, plan for financing and growth, and strategy for going to the market. It vests the boot camper with graduates with invaluable skills, experiences, and lasting network relationships. Network relationships is a key thing just in itself. We all know that success has a lot to do with how you've networked and who you've networked with. This gives them an opportunity to network other small businesses, but they also meet, because of the instructors, because of the mentors that they have at this camp, it gives them a feeler for greater areas of knowledge where they suddenly learn what maybe they don't know, but they learn where they can go to find out what they don't know so that they do know it. It increased lasting network relationship with instructors, coaches, mentors, and other entrepreneur participants. There's about a $109,000 budget this year for the boot camp. This is what PKC has budgeted for it. As I said, last year they had about 14 to 15 participants. This year it's going to be, actually I think it's going to end up a little over 20. And so last year the council budgeted 1 scholarship for this. This year I'm asking for 2 scholarships.
Now, Wayne, we're not giving this the city is not giving this scholarship to a specific
No, that's correct,
entrepreneur.
Dan. No,
You're asking us to just sponsor some scholarships.
Essentially what it is.
We don't have a say as far as.
Right. Scholarships are $2,500 apiece. I'm asking for 2 scholarships for $5,000 this year. Send a check to Palouse Knowledge Corridor, marked as scholarship money. Then they'll utilize it to wherever they feel it's best to utilize it.
Gary, this is sounds like it's off the subject, but it's not. We've got on the 9th, isn't that our next URA meeting?
I believe that is the date, yes.
And this is on this starts on the 14th.
Of June.
Okay. I'm going to bring this up at the URA meeting to see if the URA wants to get involved. That's what we're there for.
Mm-hmm.
And so I will also support it here with the city. But Wayne, I'm going to bring that up with the
URA.
Urban Renewal Agency and see if the rest of the members would like to maybe kick in a scholarship.
Well, you know, we talk about economic development. The city of Moscow says we want to develop economically. Education is a product of economics also. And this gives us an opportunity, I think, to basically write a check to cover what we're talking about to a small extent.
Jim?
Yeah, anything we can do to help the knowledge that comes out of the universities here on the Palouse stay on the Palouse, I think is money well invested. If we can get one business that establishes itself here and becomes a manufacturer or a nationwide marketer of what they produce, then it's certainly money well spent. And it's something.
So here's my other wet blanket, is we're about halfway through this fiscal year, and we're down to about $2,000 if we decide to do this with our legislative fund. Do you guys see anything else coming up that we might rather spend this on? Do you foresee anything that somebody's going to request? Hey, I want a trip to D.C. Sorry, Wayne wanted some money.
That's travel. That's a different part of the budget. That's not discretionary funding.
Yeah, it's awfully hard to predict at this point. Usually legislative reserve is for those situations that we hadn't anticipated, the council had not thought about at the budget time, or for some overrun that they really want to do a project and the budget just wasn't quite supportive of that. So I can't predict that, Dan. I imagine what will happen is if this is approved, we'll make do as best we can. If the council has some reprioritization they want to make, I'm sure we'll have discussions about that as they come up.
One thing we can do is we could leave it open-ended that if the URA is willing to pay for one and the city is willing to pay for one, that would leave another $2,500 into the coffers. Mm-hmm. So that would get us up to leave us at $4,500, and the boot camp would still have its two scholarships.
Yeah, I also serve as the interim executive director at this point for the URA. So we'd have to check into that. John, I'm not sure what the statutory authorizations are. The URA usually deals with infrastructure, that sort of thing, studies. I don't know if this would fit or not, but certainly I can look into it and provide you with that information before the meeting.
I think that's a great idea, John, to an extent. However, of course, I like the better idea of the city funding two scholarships, and if the URA can do it, them doing one. Because I don't know how many scholarships are actually going to be funded, and I would hate to see folks that want to come to the boot camp suddenly not financially be able to do it.
Let's go with the two, and which is one more than last year.
Yep.
Let's put it on a regular agenda item, Gary.
Okay.
We'll discuss it at council.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Good.
We'll let Wayne recuse himself from the vote.
He should. He's getting paid a lot of money
I have
to be
no
on.
financial gain on that, so there's no. Thank you.
Thanks, Wayne. Next up is our semi-annual, biannual ordinance amending the mayor and city council salaries effective January 1, 2016.
Precisely. By Idaho Code and City Code, every 2 years, the council must consider adjustment of council salaries. Our ordinance essentially says that we look at the cost of living adjustments from year to year, and whatever adjustments have been given, then the council, we amalgamate those and bring those forward. As you see here, the adjustments that have been made in the last 2 years were 3.1%. So total, so that is what has been inserted as the adjusted council salaries. Mayor salary would adjust from $1,890.18 per month to $1,948.78. Council salaries from $655.26 to $675.57. This is done at a particular time prior to election, does not go into effect until January 1st of the following year. So it's not perceived that council is voting on their own salaries, and certainly council can reconsider it at any time if they so desire. In the past, council has approved the salary adjustments. It's been up to council, individual councils. We've had individual council members decide whether or not they wanted to actually take the adjustments, but that's certainly up to the individual council members. So that's what's before you today.
Yeah, basically, this is here so anybody that decides they're going to run in November knows how much it's worth. So, we've sat here and argued about it, but
I don't see anything to argue about.
there's nothing really to.
Can we do this? No, we can't.
This is an ordinance, so
So it's got to go to
Recommend
the,
approval and
put it on
send
the
it on
regular
to the
agenda.
agenda.
Yeah, they, code wants to make sure that there's full public discussion about it, so
Absolutely.
it's regular.
now that's 3.1%,
Yes,
not 30.1%.
exactly.
I just, I got these glasses on, and
Yeah.
sometimes,
All right, well, that concludes our regular agenda, and now we're down to reports. The first one is Entertainment in the Park, and Kathleen Burns is going to present.
With your permission, sir.
Permission granted.
Thank you.
But it's not up. So, there it is. Thank you. Okay. So I'll make this kind of quick.
Okay?
Okay. I know you guys are anxious and hungry. So Thursday nights we do entertainment in the park, and we've been doing that for quite a while with the library, and it's part of the summer reading program. And I only found one draft bookmark, but we're having these printed by Avista, and we have the Reptile Man starting us out on June 11th, and then a magic show June 18th with Jeff Evans. Then IRT is doing a youth performance on June 25th. Our own fire department and Smokey the Bear will be here July 2nd. And then we'll conclude with the Oddball Juggler on July 9th. And then on those evenings, we also have the Oscar Arts Commission band that begins at 7 o'clock. The kids' portion starts at 6, but the Art Commission band starts at 7. So this is quite a collaboration and a partnership. We have the art department, the Moscow Library, and the University of Idaho Music Department that kind of puts it all together and puts all their parts in. So this is not an updated one, so I apologize. But
That's okay.
Okay. So we have Dell Hungerford, who is the coordinator, and she teaches music at University of Idaho, and University of Idaho also provides the space for rehearsals, and they provide a truck to transport a bunch of their kettle drums and different instruments and music stands, and then, of course, the music scores. So I just wanted to bring you up to speed on that.
Okay.
That it's all set. And I brought you 3 posters, and they're not signed, and you're the first people to get them. I was going to do a report on the farmers market, but we weren't ready. But we do open this Saturday. And this is the voted poster, and it's by Rob McPherson, and he's your art teacher from Pullman High School. So he will be signing these posters on Saturday at the market.
Cool.
But I thought I'd share them. Any questions?
Thank you,
I guess
Kathleen.
folks
You're
go
very
down to the
welcome.
park and enjoy the entertainment.
Yep.
All right, next up
Summer is
is
a good time in Moscow.
okay, next up's a continuation of last committee report. Bill Belknap on the Development Process Improvement Project.
This will just take about 30 seconds. You may recall at your last meeting I gave reports on what we had been working on over the course of the last year to improve the development plan review and customer service within our office for construction projects and development projects within the community. At that point in time, I reported we were having a second follow-up meeting with the development community, all of the contractors, design professionals, and developers that we had invited in the previous round, and we were doing a follow-up on the 14th of this month. And the committee expressed an interest to understand how that went and comments that we received during that meeting. So I will say that it went very well. The tone of the meeting was completely different than the one we had just about a year ago. Pretty much all of the comments that we received during that meeting on the 14th were all very complimentary with the process, and we had, right off the bat, had about 4 or 5 different individuals compliment us and comment on how well things have been going for them. And so overall, everything was really positive. We talked a little bit about projects and questions and how do we deal with elements that may not have been caught under plan review, or as the project changes, it may have created additional needs. So some of the things as projects move along. So we talked about that process and how we handle those situations. And but pretty much overall, it was a very good meeting and really just had good things to hear. We'll continue that process. So we'll do another meeting in December. We'll probably shift the format more from tell us about the concerns or how you're doing to sharing information about upcoming code updates or maybe common building code issues that we encounter, just kind of more educational, but also to allow that communication to happen kind of on a probably every 6-month basis. So we're going to keep it going, and everything seems to be going well.
Yeah, I've got nothing but positive feedback from folks I've talked to that went to it and said that we seem to be going in the right direction.
Same responses I've heard, and actually what I haven't heard are complaints.
Yeah, there's
so if
a
you
lot
don't
less
hear
of
the
that.
complaints, the chances are good that things are going at least in the right direction.
Good.
Yeah. When I've heard complaints in taverns or whatever, and if you talk to Bill, he'll get you the correct information, and you can get it out and squash the rumor right away if there's things going on. So, and I think that's very helpful.
Good.
You know, that they're that easy to work with and get information from.
Yeah, if you have any questions, I say this to the mayor or any council member or anybody in the public or anybody. If you have any questions about a project or what's being required, just let me know, and I'm happy to chase that down and get you the information. Okay.
Thanks, Bill.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Bill.
You guys got anything else for the good of the order? We'll consider ourselves adjourned.